Today is Thursday, August 1st. We're talking about the interest rate cut and what it means for you, the Democratic debate night 2, and what happened to Osama bin Laden's son. Plus, why you'll be seeing more Impossible Burgers and Meghan Markle has a new business. Then hang out after the news for Thing to Know Thursday's bonus interview all about CBD. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in less than 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. For the first time in more than a decade, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates. The Wall Street Journal reports the rate went down 0.25 percentage point. It's now between 2 and 2.25%, which CNBC calls historically low. Of course, interest rates impact things like loans, mortgages, car payments, and credit cards, so a lower rate means it now costs less to borrow money. The idea is to lower the key interest rate and encourage more people to borrow and spend money and spark economic growth. This is the first cut since the 2008 financial crisis. So why now? Well, it's not really because the U.S. economy is in serious trouble. NBC News reports it's more of a way to cushion the economy from a global slowdown and rising trade tensions. Investors wanted this cut, but stocks actually dropped after the Fed chairman explained the decision yesterday. It's all about his wording. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell would not promise the additional cuts in the near future that Wall Street wanted. President Trump is not happy about this uncertainty. He wanted this to be the beginning of a lot of interest rate cuts and said the central bank let us down. But some experts say the lower interest rate already leaves little wiggle room for more of an economic boost if another recession hits. Round 2, night 2. Here's what happened in last night's Democratic debate. 10 more presidential candidates talked issues and policies after the first 10 took the stage Tuesday night. Well, this time we saw more tense moments, especially involving frontrunners Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. The two went back and forth with each other on issues like abortion, but both Biden and Harris took heat from other candidates as well on issues like healthcare, immigration, criminal justice, and more. In fact, the New York Times called a moment between former Vice President Biden and Senator Cory Booker one of the most intense moments of the night, dealing with criminal justice. All candidates agreed on one thing. They want President Trump out of office, but they were divided on whether or not Democrats should start the impeachment process. Biden and Harris got the most talk time, while New York Mayor Bill de Blasio and entrepreneur Andrew Young did the least talking. Also quiet, President Trump. As of early this morning, we have not heard his thoughts on night 2 of the debate, but earlier in the day yesterday, he did say night 1 had, quote, very low ratings. CNN says more than 9 million people tuned in, which, as expected, was down from the very first debate. You can read and see more from this week's debates in today's show notes. And next up, ABC News and Univision will be hosting the third Democratic debate scheduled for mid-September. He was the potential leader of al-Qaeda, but now NBC News cites 3 U.S. officials who say Osama bin Laden's son, Hamza bin Laden, is now dead. Reports say he has threatened attacks against the U.S. and its allies. It's not clear exactly where or how Hamza bin Laden died, but the New York Times cites sources who say the U.S. government did play some sort of role. Of course, we know his father and the leader of al-Qaeda at the time, Osama bin Laden, was killed in a raid by Navy SEALs in 2011. You know that record-breaking heat wave that hit parts of Europe last week? Well, it's now headed toward Greenland, and it's expected to break more records. This is potentially a big deal for everyone, not just Greenland. CNN reports the world's second largest ice sheet is in Greenland, and if it gets warm enough and starts to melt, it could affect sea levels and weather all over the world. To give you an idea of how big this ice sheet is, if the entire thing were to melt, sea levels would rise by 23 feet. Also, when the ice melts, a bunch of fresh water is mixed with seawater, which can then affect the weather. Keep in mind the ice sheet normally melts during the summer, but this year it started melting early, and this week's heat wave is expected to speed things up even more. In fact, this could cause the most ice to melt in Greenland since the 1950s. We'll keep an eye on this one. All right, football is back. CBS Sports reports the NFL preseason kicks off tonight with Game 1. The Atlanta Falcons will play the Denver Broncos in the Pro Football Hall of Fame game in Ohio tonight. You can watch it on NBC at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And now to a different type of football. The next Women's World Cup will have 32 teams instead of 24. The governing body, FIFA, says they've decided to expand the number of teams allowed to play in the hopes of helping women's soccer continue to grow. On top of more teams participating, this also means more countries will have a chance to host the next World Cup in 2023. Until this point, 9 countries are already in the running, including Argentina, Australia, and Japan. But now the added teams will have until April to make a bid. More news ahead, but first I want to thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of amazing classes covering dozens of creative and entrepreneurial skills. You can take online classes in everything from photography and creative writing to design, productivity, and more. So whether you're returning to a longtime passion project or challenging yourself to get outside your comfort zone, Skillshare has classes for you. I think it's so important to never stop learning, both for the health of our brains and just for our happiness. Right now, my focus is improving the systems in my business as I grow. So I've watched Skillshare videos to help with that and more. Join millions of other students learning on Skillshare, and the Newsworthy listeners get a special offer. Get this, you can get 2 months free. Yep, Skillshare is offering the Newsworthy listeners 2 months of unlimited access to thousands of classes for free. So to sign up, go to Skillshare.com/newsworthy. Again, go to Skillshare.com/newsworthy to start your 2 months now. Skillshare.com/newsworthy. Now back to the news. Impossible Foods got the final thumbs up it needed to get its plant-based burgers on grocery store shelves. The company finally got approval from the Food and Drug Administration. CNBC says Impossible Foods has been working with the FDA for several years to make sure their food meets all safety regulations. The FDA wasn't sure right away about an ingredient in the burgers known as heme. Heme is described as an iron-containing molecule that makes your blood red and makes meat look pink. But it can also be found in plants, and that plant version is how Impossible Foods makes its meatless burgers more meat-like. Well, after a while, the FDA has now decided that it's safe to eat. Impossible Foods has already partnered with other big companies like fast food chains, Burger King and White Castle, and now getting into grocery stores will give it a chance to better compete with its main rival, Beyond Meat. Expect to see Impossible Foods plant-based burgers at the grocery store starting in September. The Duchess of Sussex can now add clothing designer to her resume, yet Meghan Markle is launching her own clothing line. People magazine says she's partnering with clothing brands to make a women's workwear line, and for every piece sold in stores, another piece of clothing will be donated to SmartWorks, an organization that gives clothes to women in need. Markle says her line will help women get work-appropriate attire that fits well and matches. The line comes out in September. Well, he will be remembered for producing or directing some of the most famous and successful musicals in Broadway history, including West Side Story, Fiddler on the Roof, and Phantom of the Opera. Famous Broadway director and producer Harold Prince has died after a brief illness. Deadline says he won a record 21 Tony Awards during a nearly 70-year career. Prince was 91. It's official. The Woodstock 50 Festival is canceled. USA Today reports the event was set for later this month to memorialize the iconic music festival 50 years ago. But while planning, organizers lost financial and production partners, and they couldn't secure permits or a venue. So it's not happening. Even performers started dropping out, like headliner Miley Cyrus, the Lumineers, and Jay-Z. That said, 50 years since Woodstock will still be celebrated. The town where the original festival took place is hosting its own celebration. Expect performances from musicians like Ringo Starr from the Beatles. All right, that's it for the main news today, but it's now time for Thing to Know Thursday, where a different expert explains a different thing to know only on Thursdays after the news. Today, we're talking about the CBD craze. What is CBD? Where is it legal? Why is it becoming so popular? And what do scientific studies actually say about it? My guest today is Dr. Peter Grinspoon. He's a primary care physician and cannabis practitioner, as well as an instructor at Harvard Medical School. He is a board member of the advocacy group Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. And as you'll hear, he's pretty open about the potential pros and cons of CBD. Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for coming on the Newsworthy.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with some of the basics. Can you briefly explain to us the difference between CBD and marijuana?
Absolutely. Marijuana has about 600 different chemicals in it, 100 of which are called cannabinoids. They act on the cannabinoid system in our body, which is a neurotransmitter system, much like the epinephrine system is in our body. And CBD is one of the 100 or so different cannabinoids in cannabis, in marijuana. The most common one that people know about is THC, which gets people high. But CBD is a different cannabinoid, which people use for anxiety, insomnia, and sometimes for chronic pain and for other uses. It doesn't get you high, but it does help with these other conditions. So CBD is one component of marijuana that has very particular uses.
And I think as part of this conversation, we have to talk about hemp.
Hemp is basically marijuana that's been bred to not have much of the THC in it so that you don't really get high from smoking hemp. By definition, hemp is 0.3% or less of THC, which is a very small amount. So you can get CBD from marijuana by removing the THC and the other compounds. You can get CBD just from hemp, which by definition will have very low THC. Or you could create CBD in a lab and just have pure CBD. So there are 3 different ways you can get CBD.
And are all 3 forms legal in some parts of the U.S.? Where does the legality stand, and does it differ between those 3 forms?
Part of the government says that, hey, hemp is legal, and another part of the government is saying that it should be under the most stringent illegality or the most stringent control. And then another part of the government, the FDA, just approved a drug, Epilodex, for childhood seizures. That's nothing but CBD. So you're having different parts of the government, the federal government, saying different things, contradictory things about CBD. So that adds to a lot of confusion. And then you add that each state has a different wrinkle on this. Some say that marijuana is legal. Some say that only medical marijuana is legal. Some say that CBD is legal, but marijuana is illegal. Some say that only hemp-derived CBD is legal. You get a really confusing situation, and people can get into trouble taking it from one state to the other.
But even with all of that confusion and that gray area, CBD does seem to be kind of the hot new thing where we're hearing a lot about it. Even a fast food restaurant in Colorado back in April offered burgers infused with CBD oil. So why has it become so popular now?
Because it has a lot of promise. Unfortunately, the enthusiasm seems to have outpaced the science to a certain degree. But people really have a lot of untreated chronic pain and are suffering from a lot of anxiety and insomnia. And the current treatments aren't that effective or have a lot of side effects. So I think people are really enthusiastic about what the things the CBD promises or potentially can treat. So I think people are very hopeful. And, there are good animal studies that show that it works. Just because it works in animals doesn't mean that it necessarily will pan out to work in humans. We've been kind of cruelly disappointed in other diseases like Alzheimer's disease. Everything seems to work in animals, but then when you try to apply it to humans, it doesn't seem to work. So hopefully a lot of this stuff will pan out in humans. I think there's a big hunger for it because these are like really poorly treated conditions. I mean, what are your choices for chronic pain? Nobody wants to be on opiates. Non-steroidals will kill your kidneys and give you an ulcer. Tylenol doesn't really do anything. There just aren't a lot of choices. And Americans, tens of millions of Americans have chronic pain. So if something as benign and relatively free of symptoms as CBD works, that would be kind of a miracle drug.
So it sounds like the research is still emerging when it comes to CBD. Is there any research about potential negative side effects or possible overuse?
Absolutely. Though that too is up in the air. A recent study came out just last week about how if you give animals CBD, they have liver damage. And there were all these newspaper stories about how CBD causes liver damage. But then if you read the fine print, they were giving these poor mice unbelievably large doses of CBD. So there are some studies, but again, you have to read them. Anything even remotely related to marijuana, you have to read with a grain of salt because there's so much ideology involved. And unfortunately, CBD falls into that category because again, CBD generally is a very safe substance. It can hypothetically interact with medications like in the same way that grapefruit juice can. So if someone's on a blood thinner, you want to be careful about the doses of the blood thinners. So it's not, no drug, there's no free lunch. No drug is without any side effects. But overall, CBD seems to be a very safe medication. I personally think that it would be the main side effect of CBD is the cost, the side effect to your pocketbook, because it is very expensive. And, we don't know that it works for a lot of these conditions. And the other cost is that it's not regulated very well. So people don't really know what they're getting. And that could be dangerous because sometimes when they tested it, there could actually be more THC than you expect in the sample, and that could be dangerous. I'm not particularly against THC because I'm a medical cannabis doctor, but you certainly don't want THC if you don't think you're getting it, and then you're going to drive home. That could be a disaster. So I think if CBD were more closely regulated so that people knew they were just getting CBD, there were no pesticides, there were no heavy metals, there was no THC, the whole phenomenon of taking CBD would be a lot safer.
So to that point, what do you think the future of CBD looks like?
Well, I think it's going to depend a lot on what the studies show. If good quality studies in humans show that it doesn't really do anything for anxiety, insomnia, or chronic pain, then I think that it might fade out and be yet another trend like beta carotene, antioxidants, or fish oil, all the other things that have come and gone. If there is evidence that it works, I think it could be really huge. The studies are pretty encouraging. I just did a presentation on CBD and addiction. And the studies were so intriguing about, at least in a lot of animal studies and a few human studies, about the use of CBD for heroin addiction, for methamphetamine addiction, for tobacco addiction, for cannabis addiction. It really got me excited. And again, I was trying not to get too excited because a lot of these were very preliminary studies and some of them were animal studies. But, it's really going to be interesting what the future holds. And it's really hard to tell. On the one hand, you don't want people to have false expectations. But on the other hand, these studies that come out are really exciting.
And I know you see CBD from the medical side. Have you been following what's going on with the business side? Because there are so many companies looking, even Coca-Cola has been interested in coming out with drinks that are infused with CBD. Do you have any thoughts on that?
On the one hand, there seem to be so many companies, and it's hard to tell who's legitimate and who's not. Second of all, there are so many claims for CBD, and you just worry a little bit with commercialization. You see CBD for pets, CBD for menopause, CBD for anxiety, CBD for sleep. And then you look at the different products and it's all CBD plus a couple herbs that are sprinkled in, and it's all the same CBD. And I worry that there's going to be some exploitation of people's expectations. At the same time, sometimes industry does fund a lot of the studies that we need to prove whether these things work or not. So, I would say I'm guardedly optimistic about that.
And you can read more in today's show notes. Just go to thenewsworthy.com, click episodes, and look for today's date. That's also where you'll find all the sources and links to stories we talked about throughout this episode today. Thank you so much for listening. The Newsworthy is here for you by 4 a.m. every weekday. We'll chat again tomorrow. Have a great day.